Welcome back to the channel. So as you can see, we're in my office today instead of in the shop, and that is because today's video is very old footage. Now, quite a while ago, I actually lost the hard drive that I had all of the footage and all of my photos saved on while I was trying to back it up onto another drive. So I thought that this was gone, but I was cleaning up my desktop and I found some of it saved on a folder for some reason. I must have copied it over. So I thought I would try and cut it together and make something useful out of it. Now, you're gonna have to forgive me because this is old footage, so the camera angles aren't gonna be the best, the lighting might not be the best, and I didn't narrate any of it at the time, so I'm going to try and voice it over for you to sort of at least explain what I was doing. So the style of this video is going to be a little bit different than some of my more recent stuff, and honestly, I hope my more recent stuff is getting a little bit better quality than what I filmed at the time, but this is the best that I can do with the footage that I had, and I know there's people out there that are wanting to know how to do the inner and outer tie rod on a Delica L400. So again, I've cut it together best I can. Sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you at the end of the video.
Obviously, the first thing that we need to do is get the vehicle up in the air, get the wheels off to gain access to everything, and then we can start working on getting that cotter pin out of the outer tie rod. Now, if your vehicle is rusty, this can be a little bit more difficult. You could just break it off if you're just throwing the parts away. In this instance, it came out pretty easily, so I was able to put my 19mm socket on there and back off the castle nut. Now, you notice I left the castle nut in place, and that's because I'm about to strike the knuckle with a hammer here, and that's the easiest way I find to remove an outer tie rod from a steering knuckle. Now, yes, there are specific tools out there designed for this job, but I'm going to be honest, I found using this method has worked far better over the years than the tools, and you don't do nearly as much damage. Next, we're going to remove the bellows. That means removing the clips. The outer one came off fairly easily. You'll see I'm struggling a little bit with the inner one. Now, you can see that the inner one is actually an ear clamp that is compressed in place to tighten it up. What I'm trying to do here is get something in between the bellow and that clamp to try and spread out the clamp portion again. Because I'm not going to be replacing this bellows and we'll be reusing it, I want to try and reuse the original clamp. You can use a zip tie if you can't save the clamp, but if you can use a metal clamp, it's always a little bit better. Then we can pull everything out of the way, gain access to that inner tie rod end, and to do that means that we have to bend the locking tabs back out of the way. I'm just using a pry bar and a hammer here and tapping it back. Once the lock tabs are out of the way, we can go ahead and break the inner tie rod loose. Now again, there are specialty tools for inner tie rods, but I'm gonna be honest, a pipe wrench works just fine. The only time that I ever actually use an inner tie rod tool is if I can't get my pipe wrench in there, or if I can't get just a normal open end wrench onto the flats of the inner tie rod. Once it's broken free, it should spin off very easily by hand, and we can take the whole assembly out. And this is that lock ring that we just had to back off. Now we've got the whole assembly in the vise. You'll notice that I'm kind of stopping my rotation as I go around. That's because I'm counting each rotation as I take it off. This will at least give us a ballpark idea of how far we need to put the new parts back together and keep our wheels kind of somewhat in the vicinity of where they're supposed to be. And now you'll get to watch me slowly remove this outer tie rod. Definitely not to take up time and appease the algorithm. And okay, there we go. So what I didn't show you is also remove the nut and the bellows, because again, like I said, we're going to reuse that bellow. Now this is that retaining ring again. I've actually put it in the vise, flattened it out because the new tie rod didn't come with a retainer, and we're going to reinstall it back onto the inner tie rod. You want to make sure that those tabs are facing inboard because they're going to lock into the slots on the steering rack. Once we've got everything lined up and tightened down by hand, we're going to snug it all back up again using our trusty old pipe wrench. Now, if you have an open end wrench large enough to fit onto the flats, you can go ahead and use that. Next, we're going to flat down those locking tabs again. I try and do it with a hammer, but there's not really enough room to get a good swing, so I end up coming back in with some slip joint pliers and just bending it back over again. Now we're going to go ahead and reinstall the bellows. This can be a little bit of a pain, but I'll fast forward that so you don't need to watch it all. And this is the clamp that I had to spread apart earlier. Now I'm just going to tighten it back up again on the steering rack. Once we've got that inner clamp tightened back down, we can go ahead and reinstall the outer clamp. And because I am an absolute proponent of anti-seize, I like to make sure I anti-seize up all the threads before putting the jam nut on, and then spin the jam nut down and install our outer tie rod end. Remember, we counted the amount of rotations it took to remove the tie rod end off of the old inner tie rod, so we're going to reinstall the new one with the same amount of turns. That's going to get us at least into the ballpark of where we need to be, so we're not dragging our tires sideways down the road when we head down to the alignment shop later, but it's not going to be exact. Next, Install the tie rod end into the knuckle and put on the castle nut. Now remember, the castle nut has slots in it, and these slots need to line up with the hole in the tie rod end threads itself. If you go a little bit too far past it, remember, you don't want to back that nut off. Continue tightening it up to the next slot. If you find that you're too tight, then it's best to just take the castle nut off, remove the tie rod end from the knuckle, reset everything, and start over again. Once your slots are nicely lined up, install your cotter pin, bend it over, and remember the unwritten rule of the shop: a hammer is always the closest tool to you.
At this point, all we need to do is unthread that grease nipple blank in the outer tie rod and thread in the new grease nipple that would have been supplied in the package. Then grab our grease gun and put a little bit of grease into the joint. Remember, you want to put in enough to fill up the boot, but you don't want to go to the point where it's squeezing out all over the place because it's an unnecessary mess. Of course, if you do that, it's not a big deal. Grab your rag, wipe off the excess grease, and you're good to go. And this is where I ran out of footage, but it doesn't really matter because we're pretty close to being complete anyways. Now, because we've done steering work, that means the vehicle obviously needs to go in for a wheel alignment, and if you already have your alignment booked, or if your alignment is a little ways away but you don't plan on driving the vehicle in the meantime, you can go ahead and tighten up that jam nut, put your wheels on, and call it good. However, if your alignment's a little ways out and you do need to drive the vehicle in the meantime, it might be advisable to at least do a visual alignment on those front wheels, just so you're not burning off the tires in the meantime. If you'd like to know how to do that, go ahead and hop over to my Land Rover Discovery tie rod end video. I show how to do a basic visual front wheel alignment in there. Remember, a visual alignment is just to get you in the ballpark. It does not replace proper alignment. You still need to take it into a shop that has an alignment rack and have them hook it up and make sure everything's in spec. Then all that's left is to do your final check, make sure that everything's tight and in place, put your wheel back on, torque it down, and drop the vehicle back on the ground. Now, I know the releases of my videos haven't really been all that consistent as of late. I do apologize for that, and I'm trying my best, but with a newborn, it's a little bit more difficult. However, if you do like what I'm doing, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. I really do appreciate it, and it helps me in the channel. Otherwise, get out in the shop and do something. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.